I've found that whenever there's a call in my life to push a little bit further in terms of what I can occupy, how I'm expressing myself, actualizing what I feel is part of my purpose or what I'm here to do, and to bring that out into the world a little bit more, I always come up against a real inverted astral energy, which shows up typically as this negative mother problem, which has this persecutory flavor to it, which I believe I've touched on in a few different ways before. When we're playing with this archetypally and psychologically, the masculine, the malevolent masculine, like your Sarumans and your Voldemorts, it doesn't always have to be a wizard, but that which it condemns from up high, it looks down and it may say something like, you're worthless, this will never matter, da 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 da, this is stupid, you're superficial, or like whatever these kind of critical judgments are, and they come from this up place. So that's this negative masculine thing in its persecutory quality. It's more like a condemning maybe rather than persecuting. With the feminine, it's an extremely, it in its shadow side is this, the witch energy, but the shaming energy. You're a terrible person. I can't believe you thought you could do that. How dare you? And it comes from a much, much, much deeper place. It comes from downward. We've seen some cultural references to this now with some of the aftermath of the Me Too movement, which at first glance was a positive in terms of pointing out exploitation in the industry, etc. But what we've also seen is a pathological femininity come out of that too. One of the big cases being the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, where you've got this really essentially psychotic, fragmented woman who's just manipulating and making up stories and all of this. But that it's reputation destroying. This is a particular flavor of the negative feminine. And that destroying through, yeah, it's like when you've got a negative feminine energy here, coming out into the world is almost impossible. Everyone is against you. It's a much more all-encompassing energy, which is what makes it so devouring, the devouring mother. So I've carried a negative mother complex personally. It's part of my personal psychology in that way. And I've touched on this a couple times at least, I think, on my channel, where part of becoming a mother and moving onto our property here was a big disruption of that inheritance of the feminine information, especially because all of the steps that we made to get to this point were from a place of alignment and of consciousness, right? It was very much an inner movement and having to grow into that rather than just move the pieces around on the surface. And it was such a dynamic corruption, or rather disturbance in the information as it had been constellated through my ancestral lineage, that our first night in this house, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, actually died. So a very shamanic, ancestral shifting. Now, my maternal grandmother was a straight narcissist, very much not a conscious person at all, very much an astral being, so to speak. So it makes sense that someone who is so unindividualized would have such a demise as a result of my individuating out with consciousness. Now, she was on the decline anyway. She had dementia and all of this, so she was on the way out. But in the weeks leading up to our move here, the decline exponentially sped up, exponentially, leading to the first night being here, her passing away. And I had an intuitive feeling that just made sense to me in terms of the psychic atmosphere at the time and what I was meeting. But I'm prefacing this to outline an important key that I think everyone comes to confront at some point because of the nature of the regressive feminine that we have to confront in some way, shape or form as part of individuating. Also the fact that even if one doesn't carry a negative mother complex at the personal level, there's a collective factor of our civilization having a negative feminine and mother complex problem at the collective level. And so when I came to meet all of this insane feminine energy, which as it possessed me, when it really came up in its worst form, it was this ultimate psychotic misery where the only logical thing to do from that would be to kill oneself. So that suicidal ideation of things are so bad I should just end my life. This is something that I think everyone eventually will touch an angle of when we're in that embodiment journey, because in going down, in descending consciousness down and having to open up, merge the consciousness with substance for one, but then open up to come into expression, we have to meet all of that which we are carrying individually and then collectively. All of this untouched form of substance, that part of our consciousness which comes from the earth, our human consciousness, because yes, we can talk about the individualized soul and the causal body and all of that which is gained through spiritual virtue and experience throughout lifetimes and all of this. But from the personality angle, from the substance angle, we all stem from the earth consciousness. And it is a being. And while many can, let's say at least in the spiritual space, on the esoteric space, we can say that in a conceptual way, it is another thing entirely to actually come into relationship with the pain body of the earth, which we meet through first our own pain body. And you go through deeper and deeper layers, and the pain gets more and more, as you go through the layers, less and less individual and more archetypal, and also more painful. And by personal or individual, I mean the unique stories or experiences that come from our own life, but then it goes deeper and deeper, and then we hit stuff in the ancestry and we hit stuff in the culture. So all of this happens. But we have to meet and come into consciousness and mature our consciousness as a masculine component in relationship to all of this pain that we pass through. And it's not easy. As I said, the feeling states are so intense that it requires a good development of consciousness just to be able to withstand it. As I said, in the worst state for myself, deep, the suicidal ideation, life is completely hopeless, that being an archetypal message of coming in like the oceanic waves of this. And this is something that we'll have to meet, because to become ourselves, to flourish as that unique flower that is of nature, we have to meet nature as it has been so deeply suppressed and suffered. And it's something like this instinctual part of us which reveals the freedom of the human body, the joy of the human body, and the full expression of the human body, that which we can kind of get a glimmer of when we see children in their natural state, that the purity and the naturalness of their own sacral extension in that way, the sacral center being that creative center, the uterus being in that position as well, all of this which stems out from the earth, the pranic energy that plugs us into the earth, earth being a third ray planet, the third ray, and its connection to the sacral center. That all of the experience that we've had of that being shut down, that being shut down, that being shut down, and there is a consciousness to this part, this rejected life, this rejected entity. And it's something like when we come up, when she, as this deeper part of you and I and everyone at the, regardless of being male or female, let's say the she that is the unique cultivator of you from the human standpoint, that has been so violently rejected. The integrity of that has been so violently rejected that it's this deep, it's like it goes back into itself. It's like, oh, I'm here, oh, but the world doesn't want this. It shames me, it violates me, it attacks me, persecutes me, projects all of its evil onto me in my pure state of innocence. And so then it crawls back in on itself. And if anything inverts for long enough, this is actually the true source of evil Evil, if we understand that all is one and everything is an energetic vibrational movement, then the question is, what is evil then? Well, it's that which inverts and then it becomes distorted and sickly. Part of the Uranian seventh ray process of coming into freedom is this opening into this sacral center and the coming into the lower centers and starting to open out this way and work with all of this very tender energy and to meet all of the pain through the lower centers. The pain that's down here is the reason why so many people never get to individualize or actualize themselves. Because to be free is to expand into that eros and into freedom and enjoyment and true expression. And every time we make a little stretch in that direction, we're going to open that up. And when we open a layer up, then we're going to meet another round of that pain which has been stored down there. So we think of it like a spiral. And every time you expand on the one hand, oh, more joy, more freedom, more authenticity, and then you meet another round of the pain. In the earlier phases of it, I find that many people come to experience the persecuting, attacking energy through some kind of relational dynamic, because that's usually where the early imprints are. A lot of the time it can be family situations or friendship groups. Family is often the big one. I had a commenter on a video recently talking about surrendering into her own feminine enjoyment and then her father problem appearing, or a conflict with the father coming up immediately as a consequence of that. Things like that happen a lot because we come to interface with those original dynamics where we learn we can't be free here, we can't be authentic here because this person's problem or the information that came from here. And these things are really painful, you guys. The other thing that's really challenging with this is because of the fact of the degree of pain, now we're seeing the dweller on the threshold as it's represented by the moon, esoterically. The moon as the constructed personality. We've spoken about the moon with Virgo and Cancer. It's the construction of the form. All of those multiple bodies often build themselves out of those core pains, because if we're not met in that really tender place with love, and instead it's shame, attack, abandonment, all of the things, and we don't have the consciousness to process it, it just gets plopped into the subconscious, sealed up, and then we develop all the neurotic, and we spoke about this with the recent Mars in Virgo video, right? We develop those maladaptive strategies of dealing with it, whether that's dissociation or isolation or becoming codependent, or addicted to substances. There's all different kinds of ways that people cope with it. Becoming a funny, over-the-top personality sometimes, working out a persona that makes you able to interface in a way that you're not constantly feeling that attack. Because of these maladaptive strategies, it means that there's often so much of our personalities and our habits that are operating in a way as to keep us imprisoned. That's the protective element of the moon, particularly as we see it in Cancer. It's said that that's the function of moon ruling Cancer. Exoterically, it shields the growing consciousness, which when it releases that moon, or without the moon being there as that encasement, you're in the Neptunian, like that full, sensitive, empathic, unified quality, which is kind of what you are as your kid. So it sort of seals you up so that you're not floating and adrift in the sea or the ocean, so to speak. Because of this, our commitment and loyalty to the truth has to really be so rock solid. Because when we start to open really deep layers of these things, we often won't even realize that something painful from the unconscious is coming to open up. We we just start to feel a bit insecure, or we're noticing we're starting to have our emotional eating habits, or we're getting angry at other people and wanting to cut off, or you're noticing a lot of noise in the mind and you're scattered, whatever are the particular ways in which our systems sort of compensate and maladapt. Often it's like those are the multiple bodies, the moon and the mental, emotional, physical starting to spin. And then eventually what will happen, presuming that we are in fact loyal to the truth and that we still have a fundamental desire from the soul to merge with the truth and to meet ourselves, eventually those will fall away, sometimes chaotically or sometimes very uncomfortably, and then we meet whatever is underneath, and usually that is going to be something stored in the body. And these are the very vulnerable times that we need to be able to protect and nourish ourselves as best as we can. What really helps is having those connections in our lives that really are reliable and trustworthy and supportive. My husband is my support system for those times. I know he understands, even if he doesn't really know what I'm going through, or he's not able to yet touch that part in himself, so can't technically empathize. You know, he's not going to attack me or think that I'm being any particular some kind of something because I'm going through a hard time. For many people, then there needs to just be that discernment. It's a Libran quality in a way, to know who are your allies when it comes to this, because most people are just too, let's say people plugged into the mass consciousness they're just going through the motions. They're not in intimate relationship with what is true, and so they can't appreciate the struggle that one faces when confronting that vulnerability. So meeting our deep human brokenness it's really hard. It's hard to feel so crushingly vulnerable that you can't step outside of your house, or that you can't interface with the world at all because you're going to feel like you're going to get attacked. That's a big one for me, is really violent persecution. And yeah, there's a masculine component or the feminine component, which is you're just terrible and you'll never amount to anything and you should just kill yourself. And it's a real nasty energy, and I find, again, it will always come up as another layer when I'm being invited to expand. Can you see? That's what this, coming back to that spiral image. So, okay, now there's a bit more consciousness to bring, there's a bit more creative demand on what you're here to do, and it's hard. It means that, as I've touched on before, I think I spoke about it with the Taurus video, and just as a comment generally on discipleship in general. But it means that every time there's a deepening into that process of actualization, you're likely going to hit another 8th housey scorpionic battle with the astral, whether that's showing up as one of those ancestral dynamics, let's say in the family context, or getting attacked by friends, or some way in which that violence plays itself out, that disruption, that disconnection, or when it comes to the deeper levels and it's just happening at the internal level, and yet while there's no drama on the surface, which can be relieving, it's still so excruciatingly painful and in a deeper and more subtle way, which can actually make it trickier, because we're getting closer and closer to what those core foundational points are in our human personalities, those foundational parts. So this is where we come to that maturation of consciousness. It is where we start really taking responsibility for dealing with the feminine problem. What are the reality of what's the consequence of the fact that we've just dissociated from the ground of things for so long? Coming back to our Pisces Virgo discussion with Mars in Virgo, the pain of the rejected feminine, the rejected substance, and then coming into Pisces with consciousness, or the revelation of consciousness in that 6th ray way, but then having to bring it down, 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 down. This is where we get wisdom, because we can have mystical states, or we can have revelations of divine law and order, but the real embodiment of human love comes through that. It's a very 2nd ray thing here, which of course expresses through Pisces and Virgo, but it brings about it's a healing ray as well, right? And it brings wholeness into the picture. It's also, if we think of Gemini as a 2nd ray sign and esoterically ruled by Venus, it rules the wedding of the two opposites, that process together. So in a way, even though we're talking about Virgo Pisces and the moon more than anything else in this video. It's also touching on some of the things we spoke about with the Uranus in Gemini transit, because that's going to quicken or bring even more intuitive consciousness to that process of bringing the two halves together. And that's going to hit on some of those Virgo themes as well, just being through the mutable cross of matter, of substance, of materialization in the most concrete, exoteric sense. So the healing of the bodies. So coming back to what I started this video with the negative mother thing, we're having to come to meet this really a combination of pissed off, hateful, insane, neurotic, so miserable that it's suicidal energies inside of that feminine part of every psyche, man or woman, which is the wounded human being of matter and therefore of mother. And we're not going to be able to reach out. Think of the fourth and 10th house here as well, with the core of who you are versus the coming out into the world, and the Capricornian mountain of initiation. We can't reach up without coming down. And it means, once again, meeting the pain of the rejection every time we try and come into ourselves. We're going to experience that more and more and more and more. And part of the healing will result in that expansion through the belly, through the sacral center, and through what will feel like an exhalation of the body. And that is consciousness coming in. Let's say that's the soul now coming in and down and down and down and coming to land in the form. This feminine energy at a bigger or more broader metaphysical level is that Cancerian or lunar meeting the regressive thing, which the Jungians also talk about whenever there's a development of consciousness that goes on, because every time we're going to reach for evolution, the forces of old always come up to test the consciousness. And in the different myths and fairy tales, even though this is seen as a horrendous problem to overcome, the function of it psychologically is that it helps the consciousness mature, because you are having to meet everything that you are and are carrying with you and what the collective's carrying with you. DK himself says that when we talk about initiates, so often it's the case that it is a lonely path, and they're often outcasts or outliers relative to the society. It's not always the case, but certainly at an interpersonal level, because someone who is an initiate is bringing the future in. And for people who aren't working with that evolutionary principle, they're just sitting in that which has been constructed as the norm. And when you bring something new in, it's always going to hit up against those edges. So it's necessarily something that we have to mature through. And first, if we're worried about being persecuted by the world, which is a completely valid, stressful fear, but really coming to take ownership and responsibility of meeting the persecutor in ourselves. And so every time we come into expression and we have that however it appears, whether it's someone or just that psychological energy in yourself. For me, being a second ray person, more neurotic, it expresses as that internal, you should just cave in and destroy yourself. It comes in that way. For some people, it can express in the narcissistic way, where they might identify with the persecutor and all of this, right? But it's very much a visceral shutting down. That's the inhibition. And I'm a 12th house person, so that really that bondage that can be experienced there. But it's also the releasing of that. That's where we get the, as we discussed in the 12th house video, the relinquishment or the release of not just the old, but then the retrieval of the gifts that come with letting go of that old, the shedding. And generally we say for the life of the disciple, the 10th, 11th, 12th houses kind of generally become a bit more active, because they are that of emergence into purpose, world service, and the world saviour, Pisces and 12th house. So we're all going to come at different various angles of this, and the maturity or the invitation here is to hold that in the awareness of consciousness, and to know that to become more of yourself is going to be simultaneously this thing of strengthening your core and feeling much more of a oomph to your own capacity to get out there and to be the truth that you are fundamentally in all of this, and simultaneously meet that which is crushingly in pain and the rejection of that matter principle in whatever way it's going to appear. And that is a very harsh contradiction to confront, because you're getting out there more and more, and the vulnerability is more and more. So it's that constant ebb and flow of this. And we're going to achieve more of that maturity and human wisdom through being able to continuously make the choice of love and nourishment for ourselves whenever that challenge appears. And sometimes that can be taking a break or having to insulate a bit more. Sometimes it's going to be having to push forward in any case, even though there are feelings of the persecutor right there. Sometimes you have to, that's that Saturnian thing right there, the application of concentration to push through those limits. You're going to have to do it that way. So it's the different angles of, let's say, the lunar, Martian, and Saturnian thresholdy elements to do battle through Mars. You have to sort of penetrate these different aspects of psyche and all of this. So sometimes there's an active component, sometimes there's a receptive yin sheltering component where you just have to, you just literally can't go on. You have to take the time to nourish. And the invitation is always to sink your consciousness down and to meet with the most honesty possible what's going on at the core. I feel hopeless. I want to die. I feel like there's no point in trying. No one cares what I have to say. Whatever it is. I can't do it. There are many, many, many different things that we come up against. But we really have to sit and stew in those energies and embrace them as part of that process. And that is like spiraling through again. It's a really good image to use. Spiraling upwards in consciousness, and then you're anchoring it down, you're opening through layers. On the other side of passing through these deeply negative states, you will get to experience a little bit more wholeness, a little bit more freedom, a little bit more confidence. And it's the same thing over and over again. So the regressive aspect of the past, coming down into the lower centers to meet layers of pain, simultaneously getting stronger and weaker or more vulnerable, and being able to relax into those movements with a little bit more trust. Because I had such an unsettled, neglected childhood, I became so much of a fighter. So I got really adept at just making those difficult decisions and having to apply that first ray energy of, all right, destroy that, cut that off, move into here, we got to get out of this environment, let's go there. That the warrior energy, it's very Aries, the will to be, and what needs to be culled. But the other energies of being able to really meet that crushing center, a lot harder, a lot of harshness towards myself, and a preference for expansion just by virtue of not really having much experience or trust with those deeper interior processes of surrender, of loving care, having been so neglected as a child, so not having an imprint of that. And that's part of that negative mother problem as well. So much of us have had so many needs not met or violated, and that's part of the growing. It's the maturation of, let's say, cosmic love into compassion. Maybe compassion as it becomes more integrated into the realms of substance, something like that. Or just mature love, or a kind of dark mother embrace love, which becomes the actualization of the Father's love in Pisces.